Hey everyone, it's Gabrielle with This Millennial Nation again, and today we are joined with Dr. Jen Murff, who is the co-founder along with her husband Justin Murff of Millennials for Marriage. Now, Jen is not only an incredible friend of mine, but she's also absolutely brilliant. She has spent the last few years really delving into our generation, really what makes us tick, whether it's interpersonal relationships at work, interpersonal relationships in marriage, and really the impact that we have on our community. So Jen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first question right off the top is, what made you so interested in our generation?
Well, the emerging generation obviously are the leaders of tomorrow. And if we don't invest in the next generation, I think we've missed the opportunity to really change the course of where our nation is going. And so I started out actually focusing on millennials on the talent management side. And as I began to go deeper, I became more interested in the sociology side of how millennials think and how culture has driven millennials from point A to point B. And that's where marriage has come into place and how that has affected society as a whole and the very fabric of our society.
So if you could just give three different reasons, what are three ways that millennials are different than, say, the baby boomer generation?
Well, I think the first one is that there are no absolutes with millennials. They kind of they create their reality by the things that are around them, maybe by social interaction, or they create reality that's different than the previous generation. The second thing that is different with millennials than the previous generation is that they are extremely socially minded. Their heartbeat is to see change happen, to make an impact in society as a whole. Not that the previous generations didn't care, but they really have a heart for social justice, for areas that are very different. Like, here's an example. You have previous generations who've made their cultural wars things such as gay marriage, very black and white. Our generation takes a different approach to their cultural wars, and they look at what's fair, what's equal, and they've made that their battle on which they're going to die for. And so that's something that's very different than the previous generations. And the last thing, I think that they are very innovative and creative. They're constantly thinking 10 steps ahead. Of course, everyone wants to be the next Facebook CEO type of creator. And so I think it keeps our generation on our toes.
That's incredible. So you basically said we're abstract, no absolutes. We are justice-hearted, and we're creative, and we're innovative. As millennials are entering adulthood, what are some of the challenges that you're noticing within your own studies that they're having to overcome as they become adults?
Well, of course, my passion is to see millennials embrace marriage. Unfortunately, we've taken our experiences, because we're very experiential in our very approach to life. We've allowed our experiences to dictate our worldview. Rather, in the past, you have generations who, truth was truth. It's truth. Unlike the previous generations, we allow our social interactions to dictate the way we think. So put that in the context of marriage. 50% of our generation come from divorced homes. So now marriage has become something that should be feared, something that should be rejected, something that should be not desired. Another thing when it comes to marriage is because we don't have any type of absolute truth, then it doesn't really matter what the formation of a family looks like anymore. But research has shown that, 53% of children born today are born out of wedlock, and you have 83% of those children will enter into poverty. These are, this is really important that millennials should start thinking about, that even though their social interactions have tried to define marriage as negative, research says something very different, that it is the very best thing for our nation, for our or organizations, even for you personally. Millennials who are married usually they create wealth. They are able to give back to society in a different way than other millennials who have opposed marriage.
Do you think that because so many of us have come from divorced homes, that that's causing us to not get married at all? Or do you think that we're just putting it off to make sure that that person really is the one?
I think that the root of both of them is fear. I think anything that in life, any decision that you make, if the foundation is fear, it's probably not solid. And that's just, that can be with anything. I think I come from a divorced home. My husband comes from a divorced home. We completely debunk the myths and the lies that say marriage is X, Y, Z. I got married at 21 years old. My husband was 23 and a half, I think. And we said yes, despite what our narrative was. Our narrative says you come from divorced homes and it's not going to work. You're never going to finish your education. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to be able to create wealth. You're not going to you're not going to be able to create purpose. However, we have debunked that myth. We've gone on 10 years of marriage, and we have worked through those mindsets of the fear that may have, been in place. We've gone on to get our education, both of us at graduate level. I'm almost finished with my doctorate. And we have 4 children, all under the age of 7. So culture, if you see something different, and if you because we're so experiential, all our generation needs to do is see something and experience a social interaction that's different than the culture is telling them. And once you're able to do that, let me tell you, I believe that marriage will have a place in society once again. They just need to see and experience something different.
To that end, let's just say millennials don't embrace marriage. If we continue along this path, did you say what percentage of millennials right now are married?
Oh my goodness. I don't know the exact statistic, but I think it's 20 something percent.
Yeah, I'd figure it's
small.
About a quarter. So say if that continues, because I've seen statistics that millennials are saying that, up to 40% of them said that they would be okay if they didn't ever get married. Mm-hmm. So if that continues, what does our society look like in 25 years if we don't have marriage as a cornerstone?
Well, you're going to have 83% of our nation in poverty. Again, marriage is a wealth builder. It also brings stability in the home. When you have children who are living without a father or mother figure, depending on, roles have changed, society's changed. You may have stay-at-home dads or whatever. You're going to have more poverty, more children in correction facilities. You're going to have, as far as education goes, you're not going to have children who are going to thrive, to be able to, I suppose, thrive in their academics. So as far as children go, it's really going to be devastating to the life of the family unit. 2, think about the real estate market. I know this sounds so silly, but a lot of our strength in our economy comes from the real estate. If you have single family homes, you are not able, they're not able to buy homes the way that previous generations have. So that's going to really hurt our economy. Small businesses, it's coming from a marriage that has small children. It's a lot easier to run an organization having a spouse to help carry the load with children than it is if I was single.
Well, also too, the community planning aspect of it as well. I know I've been hearing from many people who are community developers looking at how are they going to be planning out real estate, because they're like, well, we don't know. If millennials continue to not get married, not have kids, then are we going to be needing to build more subdivisions, or do we need to build more condos? Do we need to have more shared space for dogs versus shared space for playgrounds? And as someone who's looking at the future, you have to say, well, what is our literal world? What is our street block going to look like if we continue down this road? So yes, the impact is personal, but it's also community based as well. And how do we prepare for the future of, what do we do? Getting back to that component, they were talking about fear. And I thought that was really powerful, that fear is a cornerstone of why people either don't enter into marriage or don't just delay the process. How would someone overcome that fear? I mean, that's something that it's usually based off of a personal hurt that they've had, an experience that they've had. Maybe their parents were divorced, but what is that process like for them to be able to overcome it, to engage in a healthy relationship?
Well, like I said earlier, we shape our worldview by our experiences and by our social interactions. I think one of the most powerful things that young people can do is get around people who have strong marriages. That gives you a different perspective. It lets you see a family. Growing up, I came from a dysfunctional home, but my aunt and my uncle, they took me under their wings. I lived with them most of my life, and I seen a marriage function so beautifully that I wanted it. And it changed my perspective on why marriage was so important. It would have been very, very, very easy for me to become completely disenfranchised with the institution of marriage. However, through the experiences and seeing the things that I seen through their marriage, it changed my perspective. So one of the most valuable things is get a mentor, get marriage. Look for couples who have strong marriages and see things different. Two is you have to be able to separate your parents' narrative with your future narrative. I think that we've been given great brains to be able to compartmentalize the way we think. My husband is not my father. And that's okay to think that. It's okay to know that. And being able to place, just to be able to separate them mentally, emotionally, from one another is very important. That, also, marriage is not flawed. We are as individuals. And it is very easy to see how marriage can go wrong, but the person that needs to be changed the most in a marriage is you. And that's been the most valuable thing that I've learned. I can't change my husband and his little quirks and how he leaves his shoes on the ground or his socks in front of the front door. I can't change those things. However, there are things inside of me. Maybe sometimes I can manipulate, or I can shut down, or whatever. I can change my behavior, my patterns of behavior, so that I can set myself up for a successful marriage.
That's fantastic. And essentially what we're talking about is finding mentorship in others, whether they're peers or whether they're people who are older than you, but also to being okay that you're in process and being okay with your brokenness as well. So when you started Millennials for Marriage, you saw that there was a need that wasn't being filled, that there were conversations about, and even fears about what this generation was going to look like or feel like, or whether they were going to even embrace a traditional lifestyle. Now, I hear from many people of other generations who are fearful and are concerned about the next generation, whether or not we're going to continue having family values. What do you say to people who are concerned about this generation?
I think that there's still hope. Our generation really, we've set on a journey and we don't even know who we are and what we believe. We are, like you said, constantly in process. I think that our generation is malleable and we are very impressionable. So all we have to do as people who are advocates of marriage is set a different example, give a different narrative. And I think that our generation will embrace that. I think there's hope. I'm not one of those doomsday people. I believe the best is yet to come for our generation, and that family values and marriage, a thriving marriage is not only going to happen, but it will happen with right coalitions and right people seeing the vision that our generation can change society. And I have it's going to look different. Traditional values, we're not talking about the 1950s where you have, Leave It to Beaver and, mom's in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant and dad's going out, bringing home the bacon. It's going to look different. The family has evolved, and that's okay. We can either choose to do one or two things. We can either take this postmodern type of philosophy and make it the enemy, or we can use it as a tool and say, no, we're going to embrace this philosophy, this worldview, and we're going to evolve with it, keeping family and our traditional values first, and let it kind of evolve and morph into what it's going to be created to be. But we can actually control the narrative. So yeah, that's what I would tell them.
I think that's fantastic, and it's not being a victim of it, and it's not being fearful, but I love what you're saying. Embrace it, evolve with it, use it to our advantage. Last question before we go into our final five is, as a millennial mom, how are you noticing that we are raising our kids differently than other generations, and what are some challenges, but also some opportunities that millennial parents have in the future?
That's so good. I think I am learning. I have young kids, and I don't want to ever place fear in my children. That is very important to me. I want them to have a very realistic about society and people around them, be aware. In our own marriage, in our own family, I let them see that my husband comes first, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Children are second. Husband is first. And that has not been something that's been portrayed in the previous generations where the children have become the center rather than the marriage being the center. And so my husband and I do a thing called 5-minute dates. And, we have 4 kids. I tell you, it was a lot cheaper getting childcare when I just had 1. But now that I have 4, it gets kind of expensive. So we pull back every day, and we call it our 5-minute dates, where we go through everything about our day, talk about our things. Now, it usually lasts a little bit more than 5 minutes. And then when my children are like, but I want to talk to you guys, we just let them know, you have friends who their mommies and daddies are no longer together. And that's because they didn't invest into each other. Mommy and daddy love each other, and we need our marriage to be strong. So please let us have our 5-minute date. And we do that every single day. And I think that it's very important to raise your children with the type of philosophy that that their marriage is going to come before their children. My children are going to grow up, and they're going to leave my house. And they need to, my marriage has to be a rock. It has to be strong so that, it doesn't fall apart after the kids. The kids shouldn't be the glue that holds a marriage together. And so I think that has, for couples who are young and have children and are in our generation, I think that many of their philosophy, that a lot of millennials have the same philosophy because they've seen their parents' marriage revolve around the children. So much so that, Justin and I both came from divorced homes, but it didn't happen until after we graduated high school. They held it together for us. And then they didn't have anything left after we were gone. And so I know personally, and I want to do it different. That's not my narrative. So I'm going to start now so we're not trying to grapple at the wind once they leave.
That's so good. Making sure that you have a foundation that lasts longer than your kids. Your kids are a blessing and they're incredible, but you're right. After they go and they graduate, then you still have to be there as well. Like you, my parents divorced just the year after I graduated from high school. And I think that there are many in our generation that had that experience. And so our parents who are baby boomers had that mentality of, you got to sacrifice, you got to suck it up, you got to do what you got to do, which was incredible. And I'm so thankful for that. But again, it's a choice that I think that we're making. So we're here at our quick question segment. So if you're ready, I'm going to fire off a couple questions and just answer whatever comes top of mind. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So the first question is, what do you know now that you wish that you knew back then? Maybe it was right when you were getting started on your organization or right when you were getting married. What do you wish?
I think that I can't do it all. I can't do it all. Sometimes you have to ditch things, you have to delegate, and you have to draw the line and just say, I can't do it all, and that's okay. Time management.
Which is actually surprising because if you know Jen, she's kind of like Wonder Woman. So interesting that you learned that. Okay, second question is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
To ditch, delegate, and draw the line.
All right, next question. What books are you reading right now?
I'm reading social theory books right now, learning about the different theories that are kind of relevant in our culture pertaining marriage.
Do you have any that you would suggest?
Let's see. There is a book called Social Theory, Steve something. I don't remember his last name, but that's a great book. At this point, I'm knee deep in textbooks. So ask me that later.
You're like, no fun reading.
Yeah, there's no fun reads right now.
You know what? I can appreciate that. Okay, final question. It's kind of silly, but it's my favorite. So if the 12-year-old version of you were to meet you right now, what would she think about you and what you're doing?
I think that she would probably want to take over my organization and run it, because my 12-year-old me was just as passionate and ambitious as I am today.
Believe everything about that. Well, Dr. Jen Murff, thank you so much for spending time with us talking about this generation, about how we're doing marriage differently and how the future will actually be better if we make a decision to make it so. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.